Days in the Sun, a Journey to the West fanfiction written by Jukebox Draws, read by Jukebox Draws. Chapter 4, Samadhi. Young monk, you seem to be in a rather unfortunate predicament. The goddess sat herself down on the soft white sand of the beach. It was night time, but her glow lit up the beach as if it were high noon. Sanzong kowtowed and clasped his hands together. Yes, he replied in a quiet whimper. This terrible demon is keeping me here. He acts kind one moment, but as soon as I try to speak my mind, I only seem to anger him. Indeed, Sun Wukong has always acted in such a manner. Born of stone and hardened by fire, he feels no empathy for anyone other than himself and his subjects. He dislikes mankind the most. They are merely a source of entertainment for him. But I believe you can change the Monkey King. Guan Yin reached into her sleeve and pulled out a piece of parchment, handing it to the monk. Sanzong took it gently and held it as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. This is a spell, Guan Yin said simply. You must commit it to memory. Whatever for? Sanzong studied the characters written on the paper carefully. When you recite the spell, the golden fillet around Sun Wukong's head will tighten. He will be unable to remove it unless he learns to truly love another living thing, and earn their love in return. Guan Yin placed her hand on the monk's shoulder. Sanzong felt a wave of calm and determination wash over him like water from a soothing bath. The goddess smiled at him like a mother proud of her little one. Now go, golden cicada. Your destiny awaits. Sun Wukong. Sanzong thought of the Monkey King's name as he made his way back through the jungle to the mountain. He gripped the paper in his hand, committing the spell to memory, just as Guan Yin had instructed. He was so engrossed in his task of memorizing the characters that he didn't even notice the wisps of uncharacteristic smoke curling around his feet. It wasn't long before the devious, intruding demon snatched him up and fled the island. The monk opened his eyes and saw a bright orange blur surrounded by darkness. He blinked a few times, bringing focus back into his eyes. He tried to move his hands and feet and realized they were tied together. The orange blur slowly took the shape of a fire, and the darkness took the shape of a room. It was stone all over, cold and desolate. The door opened, and a demon stepped through, the demon that had kidnapped him, followed by several smaller demons that looked to be servants of some kind. The demon carried an aura of superiority, perhaps more than that of the Monkey King himself. Red skin that glowed with fire and lava, pitch-black hair that flowed down his back like waves in a sea of obsidian. Matching black bull horns curled around his drooping ears, heavy with golden earrings that reminded Sanzong of that of a cow. The demon was obviously a wealthy one, as he carried the strength of many offerings as well as the golden jewelry to go with it. The top half human with the legs of a bull and the stance that screamed pure raw power. Sanzong scooted as far away as he could with his back against the wall. Now, he thought, maybe Sun Wukong wasn't such a terrible creature after all. The red boy, Sanzong thought, as the demon couldn't be older than a 20-year-old human, knelt down to inspect the treasure he had stolen from the mountain. Such a sweet little monk. Red Boy sniffed the air, and Sanzong gripped his robes tighter around himself out of embarrassment of his smell. He suddenly became very aware that he hadn't bathed in a while. I'm sure you'll taste even sweeter when I devour your spirit, golden cicada, and finally gain the secret of eternal youth. The demon laughed evilly, and his minions laughed with him. Sanzong gulped. I don't taste good, I swear! The monk tried to back up further, but he was already pressed flat against the stone wall, trembling uncontrollably. Red Boy grinned devilishly, showing off teeth that no cow in Sanzong's mind should ever be allowed. I'll be the judge of that, Red Boy snarled. There was the clearing of a throat from behind Red Boy and the threshold of the door. The demon turned, expecting to address one of his minions, but instead was met with fiery golden eyes and a sharp-toothed snarl. Sun Wukong was covered in blood, dead demons littering the ground around him, heads and limbs laying several feet from discarded bodies with bite marks on the face and stab wounds to the chest. His golden staff was dripping blood onto the stone floor as he flexed his fist around the iron bar. son, Wukong! Red Boy grinned, letting out a huff. Sanzang felt relief wash over him at seeing a familiar face, but then the terror of what exactly Wukong had just done settled in. He suddenly felt less safe than he had before the Monkey King arrived. "The monk belongs to me," Wukong said simply. Red Boy barked out a laugh. "The golden cicada belongs to you. Ha! Surely you must be mistaken." The demon bull prince cracked his knuckles and summoned a spear from a burst of fire. The handle of the weapon was gold and wrapped in cords and feathers, and the head was shiny obsidian that glinted smoothly in the firelight. Sanzang turned his head away as the battle commenced. He didn't want to witness the bloodbath that would surely ensue. The clashing of metal and the whoosh of clouds and fire flooded his ears. The macaque and the bull let out war cries and screams of either pain or triumph. Sanzang didn't care to know which. When he opened his eyes, he nearly screamed as he saw Red Boy charging towards him, murder apparent in his eyes as he readied the strongest fire the monk had ever seen. He had heard of the true fire of Samadhi, but he had never before seen it with his own eyes. It was wonderfully grotesque as it manifested, bright and powerful. The monk shut his eyes tight again, readying himself for the searing pain that would surely follow. But no pain came. Sanzang opened his eyes as he moved his arms away from his face to see a bright red scarf flapping in his vision. Wukong had leapt in front of him and was now taking the blunt of the fire head on. He had his arms crossed in front of him, creating a protective golden shield. The fire burned and singed the light, causing it to reel back quicker than the Monkey King could regenerate it. The simian cried out in pain as the fire began to burn through the sleeves of his robe. The Monkey King was indeed immortal. He was hardened by fire, born from stone, but the one thing he feared, the one thing that could break through that titanium shell, the one thing that could truly kill his 8 times immortal soul, was the true fire of Samadhi. Wukong's tail wrapped around the monk's waist and pulled him close. With a scream, the monkey summoned his staff and blasted a hole in the wall. He jumped through, wrapping his arms around the monk, surrounding him, protecting him. The crash of the waves and water suddenly surrounded the monk, in addition to the strong arms around his torso. He heard flames sizzle and die out as Wukong began to swim frantically and very poorly towards the shore. Eyes still squeezed shut, Sanzang gripped the monkey's robes tight and buried his face into his scarf. Wukong pulled them both to shore with one hand, the other still wrapped around the monk. His hands were shaking, and patches of his fur still glowed with embers and smoked. He sucked in a lungful of air before he promptly passed out in the mud of the river bank. Sanzang stood and crawled out of the mud, out from under the arm of the king. Gaining his bearings, he realized that he was close to the mainland. Surely if he built a raft, he would be able to get home before sunrise. He scrambled off of the river bank, but then he stopped and turned back to the simian that rescued him. Wukong was still passed out, fur smoking and clothes almost completely destroyed, soaking wet and half covered in mud and remnants of blood. "Buddha, save me," Sanzang sighed as he removed the extra robe draped over his left shoulder. He knelt beside the still unconscious Monkey King and gently placed the robe over him, smoothing the fabric over his singed fur. Wukong was breathing heavy, his form rising and falling with his heaving breath. "Can you stand?" the monk asked. Wukong groaned and attempted to lift himself, his limbs shaking. Sanzang draped the monkey's arm over his shoulders and lifted him up. Wukong leaned against him, hissing in pain and clutching at his arm. His fur had been burned away to reveal seared red skin. It needed to be tended to as soon as possible to avoid infection. Sanzang could see the mountain, not terribly far away, a few miles at the worst, but dragging this monkey with him, they would most likely be back by sunrise. The monkeys whimpered a bit as they all scrambled over themselves to peek through the cracked door to Wukong's bedroom. One of the apes brought in a bowl of warm water as the monk had requested. Sanzang thanked the small creature as it scampered away and dipped a small, soft cloth into the water. The Monkey King was busy fidgeting with pain and scratching at his arm. "Hold still," the monk commanded softly. Wukong growled, holding his limp wrist protectively. Sanzang brought the cloth to the wound on Wukong's arm. As soon as the cloth touched his skin, the Monkey King roared in pain and yanked his arm away. "That hurts!" Wukong yelled in the monk's face. Zanzong kept his stern expression. "Well, if you held still, it wouldn't hurt as much," he said simply. He had practice in this sort of thing, as he had helped many children with similar injuries. They would kick and scream, sometimes involuntarily, and the monk would keep calm and help them through their pain. "Well, if you hadn't have run away, this wouldn't have happened," Wukong argued. Zanzong pouted his lip. This arrogant, selfish monkey who frightened him beyond belief with his abilities and forceful nature had the nerve to tell him he shouldn't have run away. "Well, if you hadn't frightened me, I wouldn't have run away." The monk raised his voice slightly. Wukong looked shocked and opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. "Well," the Monkey King sputtered, trying to cling to some form of his dignity, though there was little to be found. "You shouldn't have spoken to me in such a way. I am the great sage, equal to heaven, and you will treat me as such." "Well, you should learn to control yourself," Zanzong snapped, crossing his arms. "The universe does not revolve around you and your inappropriate demands. If you wish for me to stay here, then you will treat me as an equal, not a subject." Zanzong was beginning to see the king not as royalty, but merely as a child that needed to be disciplined. If the monk was taught anything during his time working with unruly children, it was that arrogance was perhaps the worst sin, and could not, and in this case absolutely would not, be rewarded. Wukong opened his mouth to speak again, said nothing, and then closed it. "Now hold still. This is going to sting a little," Zanzong said more firmly, enunciating each syllable as Wukong allowed the monk to hold his arm in one hand and the cloth in the other. The Monkey King hissed as the cloth was brought to his swollen wound, but he bit back his cries, and soon the stinging pain eased to a dull ache. It was silent for a moment as Wukong pouted in resignation. "By the way," Zanzong murmured, voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for saving my life." Wukong looked back at the monk with intrigued eyes. Nobody had ever thanked him before, and meant it. "You're welcome." To be continued in Chapter 5.